Fiancé laughed after his dad called me a gold digger at our engagement dinner. There'd be no wedding. The moment that shattered my future happened over caramelized crème brûlée at Le Bernardin. My name is Madison Clark, and I was supposed to be celebrating my engagement to Stephen Bennett, the man I'd loved for 3 years. Instead, I found myself standing in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, mascara streaking down my face, while 30 of New York's elite watched me walk out on the man I'd just promised to marry. It wasn't supposed to end that way. The evening had started perfectly. Stephen in his tailored Armani suit, me in the Carolina Herrera dress I'd spent 2 months' salary on, a 4-carat diamond twinkling on my finger. The private dining room overlooked Central Park. Champagne flowed freely, and Stephen's father, billionaire real estate mogul Edward Bennett, had just stood to make a toast. "To my son, who has always had impeccable taste," Edward began, raising his crystal flute. The room quieted, all eyes on the commanding figure at the head of the table. He was handsome in that silver fox way that money cultivates, salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed, Tom Ford suit hanging impeccably from his frame, Rolex gleaming under the chandelier. I smiled expectantly, waiting for the kind words about his future daughter-in-law that would welcome me into the Bennett family fold. "Though I must say," Edward continued with a chuckle that raised the hair on my neck, "his taste in business acquisitions has always been sharper than his taste in women." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. Stephen's mother, Victoria, shifted in her chair, her smile frozen in place. 3 years at Goldman Sachs taught him to recognize undervalued assets," Edward went on, gesturing toward me with his champagne glass. "But what exactly did you see in this one? Son? Sure. She's beautiful, I'll give you that. And works at… what was it again? Dear." He looked directly at me. "Something in fashion retail. Wasn't it?" "I'm the creative director at Harlow Agency," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We handle branding for luxury fashion houses." Edward waved his hand dismissively. Yes, she takes photos of handbags. Hardly the intellectual equal of a Bennett." He turned to the table at large. "But I suppose every dynasty needs its trophy wives, as long as she gives us beautiful grandchildren and doesn't try to discuss business at the dinner table. We'll get along fine." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt blood rush to my face as 30 pairs of eyes swiveled between Edward and me. Some guests looked down at their plates in embarrassment. Others watched with the barely concealed glee of witnessing a social car crash. But what broke me wasn't Edward's words. It was Stephen's reaction. He laughed. My fiancé, the man who'd whispered, "You're the smartest woman I've ever met," against my skin countless times, laughed. A nervous chuckle, perhaps, but a laugh nonetheless. Then he touched my hand under the table, as if to say, "That's just Dad being Dad. Let it go." I looked around the room at Edward's smug smile, at Victoria's practiced indifference, at Stephen's apologetic grimace that asked me to bear this humiliation quietly. And something crystallized inside me, hard and sharp and certain. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Maddie," Stephen whispered urgently, grabbing for my wrist. "Don't, he didn't mean it." I slipped my hand away from his and stood, surprisingly steady on my 4-inch Louboutins. "Thank you for clarifying my role in your family." "Edward," I said, voice carrying across the hushed room, "but I think I'll pass on being the beautiful, brainless incubator for your grandchildren." I turned to Stephen, whose face had drained of color. "And you had one job tonight. One job." I twisted the diamond ring off my finger and placed it gently beside his champagne glass. "I would have stood by you through anything. I just needed you to do the same." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my clutch and walked out, chin high, eyes forward, ignoring Stephen's calls behind me. It wasn't until I reached the elevator that my composure cracked, a sob escaping as the doors closed on the life I thought I was going to have. The 3 weeks that followed were a blur of unanswered calls, wilting flower arrangements, and concerned friends bringing wine and ice cream to my apartment. Stephen texted hourly, desperate, pleading messages that I read but couldn't bring myself to respond to. "Please call me Maddie. My father's an ass, you know that." I'm so sorry. I froze. It didn't mean anything. I can't eat. I can't sleep. Please just talk to me. On the fourth day, he showed up at my apartment with my favorite macarons from La Durée and desperation in his eyes. 5 minutes. He begged through the door I'd only opened a crack. Just give me 5 minutes. I let him in because, despite everything, I still loved him. He looked terrible designer stubble that was clearly not intentional, dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in his car. In another situation, I might have found it endearing that the always polished Stephen Bennett had come undone. You look awful, I said, crossing my arms. I feel awful. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Maddie, I messed up. I know that. But you have to understand my father. He's impossible. Standing up to him means risking everything. The company, my inheritance, my family connections. Your spine, I supplied. He flinched. That's not fair. No, what's not fair was watching you laugh while your father reduced me to an ornament in front of everyone we know. I didn't laugh because I agreed with him, Stephen protested. I laughed because I was uncomfortable and didn't know what to do. You know how he is. The man controls everything in my life. Except he doesn't control you. Stephen. Unless you let him. I sighed, suddenly exhausted. That's the problem. I'm not angry at your father for being who he's always been. I'm heartbroken because when it mattered most, you chose his approval over my dignity. I'll make it right, he said, desperation edging into his voice. I'll talk to him. I'll make him apologize. I shook my head. You still don't get it. I don't want his forced apology. I needed you to stand up in that moment to say, Dad, that's enough, to choose me. I'm choosing you now, he pleaded, reaching for my hands. Isn't that worth something? I looked at him, this man I'd planned to build a life with, and felt a dull ache where fiery love had once burned. It's worth something, I admitted, just not enough. After he left, I sat on my couch staring at the ring box he'd left behind, wondering how I could feel so certain and so lost at the same time. The following weeks brought increasingly desperate attempts from Stephen to win me back. He sent daily gifts, everything from rare first editions of my favorite books to a rescued shelter dog with a note that read, "He needed a home, and I need your forgiveness." I kept the dog a scruffy terrier mix I named Dignity, but returned the adoption papers with a note. I'm not taking care of 2 lost puppies. Figure out your life. He showed up at my office with a string quartet, bought a full-page apology in the New York Times, even ambushed me at my favorite coffee shop with what I later learned was a $50,000 espresso machine he'd purchased for the establishment, just so they'd let him wait for me. The grand gestures might have been touching if they hadn't all missed the point so spectacularly. He doesn't understand what he did wrong. I told my best friend Rachel over wine one night. After Stephen had somehow convinced the superintendent to let him fill my apartment with 1,000 paper cranes. He thinks he can just throw money at the problem and it will go away. Like father, like son, Rachel observed, refilling our glasses. That hit me like a bucket of ice water. Was Stephen really becoming Edward? The thought made my stomach turn. Meanwhile, my career was taking off in unexpected ways. The creative director at Vogue had been at the disastrous engagement dinner and had apparently been impressed by my exit. She offered me a job consulting on their digital strategy, a significant step up from my position at Harlow. I like a woman who knows her worth, she told me during our meeting. Too many talented people waste their potential with partners who diminish them. I accepted the position and threw myself into work, finding unexpected strength in my new independence. I rented a small but stylish apartment in Chelsea, adopted a Sunday ritual of farmers market shopping and reading in Washington Square Park, and slowly built a life that didn't revolve around the Bennett family drama. For his part, Stephen's attempts to reconcile grew more desperate and public. He showed up at a charity gala I was attending, dropping $100,000 on a silent auction item I'd been eyeing a photo session with my favorite photographer, only to give it to me as a no-strings-attached gift. I just want you to be happy, he said, eyes pleading, even if it's not with me. I almost softened then, almost. Then came the night that changed everything, the night of the Bennett Foundation annual gala. I hadn't planned to attend, despite having helped organize it during my time with Stephen, But my new boss at Vogue insisted, saying it was important for my career to maintain connections in those circles. Besides, she added with a knowing smile, success is the best revenge. I arrived in a gown that made me feel invincible black, sleek, architectural, my newly cut bob framing a face that had regained its confidence. I was prepared to see Stephen, had rehearsed a polite but distant greeting. What I wasn't prepared for was Edward Bennett making a beeline for me the moment I entered the ballroom. "Madison!" he boomed, loud enough for nearby guests to turn. "The prodigal almost daughter-in-law returns. Stephen said you wouldn't come." I smiled tightly. "I'm here representing Vogue." "Ah, yes, I heard about your little promotion. Moving up in the world without a Bennett ring to open doors for you. Impressive." His condescension was barely concealed beneath the compliment. "Thank you for noticing," I replied smoothly. "Though I've never needed doors opened for me, I prefer to build my own entryways." He laughed, that same dismissive chuckle from the engagement dinner. "Spirited as ever. You know, Stephen's been insufferable since you left. Moping around, distracted at work, boy's lost his edge." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want Stephen unhappy. Edward leaned closer, brandy on his breath. "Between us, I think you did him a favor. Marriage would have been a mistake. He needs someone who understands our world, not someone just trying to climb into it." The old me might have wilted under his presumption, might have stammered denials or retreated in hurt. But the woman I'd become over the past months just felt sorry for him, this powerful man with such a limited understanding of human connection. "No, Edward," I said quietly. "The mistake was thinking your world was one worth climbing into." His eyes narrowed. "Careful, girl. You're talking to a man who can end careers with a phone call. And you're talking to a woman who no longer cares what you think." I smiled genuinely now. That's the wonderful thing about walking away from people who don't value you suddenly. Their power disappears. Before he could respond, I felt a hand on my back. I turned to find Stephen, looking handsome but hollow, as if he'd lost weight since I'd last seen him. "Dad," he said, voice tight. "Can I speak to Maddie alone?" Edward smirked. "She's all yours, son, though I doubt you'll get any more sense out of her than before." I waited for Stephen to say something to finally stand up to his father. Instead, he gently guided me toward the terrace doors, away from Edward. Once outside, under a canopy of twinkling lights, he tried to take my hands. "You look incredible." I stepped back. "Thank you. But if you brought me out here to continue your campaign to get me back, I sold my shares in Bennett Properties," he blurted out. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "You did what?" "I sold my shares, all of them, to my cousin Michael. I've left the company." The magnitude of this settled over me slowly. Bennett Properties was Stephen's birthright, the empire he'd been groomed since childhood to one day lead. Leaving it was unthinkable. "Why?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Because you were right." His voice cracked slightly. "About all of it. About my father controlling me. About me letting him. About needing to find my spine." He laughed. A hollow sound. "It took losing you to realize I was becoming him, valuing the wrong things, hurting the people I love most." "Stephen, I never wanted you to give up your family legacy," I said softly. "It wasn't a legacy. It was a prison." He shrugged, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked truly unburdened. "I'm starting my own venture. Sustainable development, affordable housing, everything my father thinks is beneath the Bennett name." I didn't know what to say. This was the Stephen I'd fallen in love with, the idealistic man who'd been buried under his father's expectations. "I'm not telling you this to win you back," he continued, seeing my expression. "I know I hurt you too deeply for that. I'm telling you because you were the catalyst for me finally becoming the man I want to be. Not the man my father demanded, and I needed to thank you for that." My heart twisted. What did Edward say? Stephen's smile was grim. Called me every name in the book, threatened to disinherit me completely, said I was throwing away generations of work for a woman who wouldn't even take me back. "And your mother? Surprisingly supportive. I think she's been waiting 30 years for someone in this family to stand up to him." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the gala drifting out to the terrace, Part of me wanted to fall back into his arms, to give our story the happy ending it seemed to be begging for. But another part, the stronger part, knew that some broken things can't be unbroken. That sometimes love isn't enough to erase the memory of feeling utterly alone when you should have been most protected. "I'm proud of you," I said finally. "Truly, this is a brave thing you're doing." "Too little, too late?" he asked, a sad smile playing at his lips. "For us, yes," I admitted, "but not for you. Never too late for you to become who you're meant to be." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I miss you every day, you know." "I know." I reached out and squeezed his hand the first time I'd willingly touched him since that night. "I miss who we were too. We might have stood there longer, caught between our past and our separate futures. If a commotion hadn't erupted from inside the ballroom, raised voices, then a crash, then the unmistakable sound of Edward Bennett shouting. We hurried back inside to find Edward red-faced and furious, gesturing at a server who'd apparently spilled champagne on his custom tuxedo. The young man, barely out of his teens, was apologizing profusely, clearly terrified. "Useless," Edward was shouting. "Completely incompetent. Do you have any idea what this suit costs?" The scene was painfully familiar, Edward berating someone he considered beneath him, an audience watching uncomfortably, no one stepping in. Without thinking, I grabbed a napkin from a nearby table and walked directly to the server, positioning myself between him and Edward. "Here," I said, handing the young man the napkin. "Accidents happen, don't worry about it." "Get out of the way," Edward snarled. "This idiot is getting fired." I turned to face him, calm and steady. "No, he's not. It's champagne on fabric. Edward, not a national tragedy, and making a scene is far more embarrassing than a small stain." The ballroom had gone silent. From the corner of my eye, I could see Stephen watching, frozen in place. Edward stepped closer, looming over me. "You don't tell me how to handle my staff, you gold-digging little—" "That's enough, Dad." The words came not from Stephen, but from behind me. I turned to see Catherine Bennett, Stephen's younger sister who'd been living in Europe the past few years. She stepped forward, elegant in midnight blue, eyes flashing with the same determination I'd tried to cultivate in myself. "You will not speak to Madison, or anyone else, that way," Catherine continued, her voice carrying through the silent room. "Not tonight, not ever again." Edward's face contorted with rage. "Catherine, you stay out of this!" "No, I don't think I will." She moved to stand beside me. Madison had the courage to walk away from this family's toxicity. Stephen finally found the strength to stand up to you, and now I'm done being the quiet, obedient daughter who watches you bully everyone around you. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the assembled New York elite. The Bennett family drama, usually kept carefully behind closed doors, was now playing out for everyone to see. Edward looked around, suddenly aware of his audience. "We'll discuss this later," he hissed, before stalking off toward the bar. Catherine turned to me, a wry smile on her perfect features. "I've wanted to do that for about 20 years. Thanks for the inspiration." "I didn't do anything," I protested. "You walked out of an engagement dinner to a Bennett," she laughed. "In this crowd, that's like slaying a dragon." The server, still looking shell-shocked, thanked us both profusely before disappearing into the kitchen. As the buzz of conversation resumed around us, Catherine linked her arm through mine. "Come on," she said. "Let me introduce you to some people who've been dying to meet the woman who brought my father down a peg." For the rest of the evening, I found myself swept into Catherine's circle, brilliant, accomplished women who treated me as one of their own. I caught glimpses of Stephen throughout the night, watching me from across the room with a mixture of pride and regret. Near midnight, as I was preparing to leave, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Victoria Bennett, Stephen's mother, stood there in her designer gown and flawless makeup. "A moment, Madison," she asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner. I followed, curious what Stephen's famously reserved mother could want with her son's ex-fiancé. "I owe you an apology," she said once we were alone. "I should have spoken up that night. I should have stopped Edward." I shook my head. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bennett, it wasn't your place to stop him, it was Stephen's." "Yes," she agreed, surprising me. "But I created the environment where my son was afraid to disappoint his father, where we all were," she sighed, a lifetime of compromise in the sound. I wanted to thank you, actually. For what? For showing my children that it's possible to walk away from abuse of power, even when it costs you everything. She reached out and squeezed my hand briefly. Stephen is different now, better, stronger. That's because of you. Before I could respond, she glided away, returning to her role as the perfect society wife as if our conversation had never happened. As I collected my wrap from the coat check, Stephen appeared at my side. Can I drive you home? He asked. I considered it, then shook my head. I think it's better if I get a cab. He nodded, accepting this boundary. I heard about what happened with my father, standing up for that server. That was brave. Not brave, I corrected. Just right. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. I meant what I said earlier. He finally offered. About not expecting you back, but I need you to know something. What's that? I'm in therapy. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Turns out having Edward Bennett as a father leaves some scars. I'm working through them. Not for you, but for me. Because I never want to be the man who laughs when someone I love is being hurt. The simple honesty of this moved me more than all his grand gestures combined. I'm glad, I said sincerely. You deserve to be free of his influence. Stephen hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I have something for you, not a gift, exactly, more of a return. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was my grandmother's vintage sapphire pendant, a family heirloom I'd left behind in his apartment and had been too proud to ask for back. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment, he admitted. It's yours, always was. I clutched the pendant, unexpected tears springing to my eyes. Thank you. A taxi pulled up outside, and the moment stretched between us full of what-ifs and might-have-beens. Goodbye, Stephen, I said finally. Goodbye, Maddie, he replied, and this time it felt like he meant it. 1 year later. I stood at the podium accepting a CFDA award for my digital campaign with Vogue. The audience was filled with fashion's elite, including, I noticed with a surreal jolt, Edward and Victoria Bennett, attending as major donors to the Arts Council that sponsored the event. As I gave my acceptance speech, I caught Edward's eye in the front row. He nodded slightly, not quite respectful, but no longer dismissive either. Victoria gave a small smile. At the after-party, I found myself alone at the bar when Edward approached. He looked older somehow, less intimidating than I remembered. Congratulations, Madison, he said, ordering a scotch. Impressive work. Thank you, I replied, bracing myself for whatever barb might follow. But instead, he simply said, Stephen's doing well. His company just secured its first major development contract. I heard. I'm happy for him. Edward swirled his scotch, studying the amber liquid. He was right about you. You know, you are exceptional, just not in the way I measure value. He said this not as a compliment, but as a clinical observation. I smiled. The wonderful thing about value, Edward, is that it exists whether you recognize it or not. He gave a short laugh. You remind me of Catherine. She's running half my company now. Did you know insisted on it after that night? Turns out she has quite a head for business. I'm not surprised, I said. Bennett women seem to be made of stronger stuff than they're given credit for. He raised his glass slightly. Perhaps so. It wasn't an apology. Edward Bennett would likely never apologize to anyone for anything. But it was an acknowledgement that I had survived his attempt to diminish me, that I had flourished without the Bennett name opening doors for me. Later that night, as I rode home in a taxi award in lap, future bright before me, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, crushed and humiliated at an engagement dinner gone wrong. How that moment of public shame had ultimately been my salvation, forcing me to choose myself when no one else would. My phone buzzed with the text message, Stephen. Saw you won. Not surprising. You were always the brightest star in any room. Congratulations, Maddie. I smiled, typing back, thank you, heard about your contract. Congratulations to you too. A moment later, coffee sometime as friends. I hesitated, then replied, maybe, someday, but not yet. I put my phone away and gazed out at the city lights. Some love stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with two people who forever change each other's lives, then continue on separate paths, stronger for having known each other. And that's its own kind of happy ending. 3 years after that CFDA award, I found myself standing on the balcony of my Tribeca loft, watching the sun set over the Hudson. My agency, Clark Creative, had just signed its 10th major client, a milestone that still felt surreal. My team of 20 occupied a bright, airy office in Soho, where we helped luxury brands tell authentic stories. On my desk sat a framed copy of Forbes' 40 Under 40 issue with my picture inside, the woman who redefined luxury marketing. Dignity, now a distinguished gentleman of a terrier with gray around his muzzle, curled at my feet as I sipped my wine. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd never wanted Stephen's money. Yet here I was, more financially successful than I'd ever imagined possible. The true richness, though, was in the quiet confidence I carried, the knowledge that I had built this life, brick by brick, solely on my own terms. I'd seen Stephen exactly twice since that night at the awards ceremony. Once at a mutual friend's wedding, where we'd exchanged pleasant small talk before gravitating to opposite sides of the reception. The second time at a charity auction, where he'd introduced me to his date, a brilliant environmental lawyer with kind eyes and a spine of steel. I'd felt nothing but genuine happiness for him. Catherine Bennett had become an unexpected friend. We met for lunch every few months, laughing over how scandalized her father still became when she mentioned my name. She'd transformed the sustainable housing division of Bennett Properties into its most profitable arm, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. "You know," she'd told me during our last lunch, "Stephen keeps that article about you framed in his office, the Forbes one." "Really?" I'd asked, surprised. She'd nodded. "Says it reminds him that the best things in his life came from finally being brave enough to choose his own path." I understood that sentiment completely. My doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. My date for the evening, an architect I'd met at a climate change fundraiser, was right on time. As I welcomed him in, I caught sight of my grandmother's sapphire pendant hanging on my jewelry stand. I hadn't worn it since Stephen returned it to me, but tonight felt right somehow. "Beautiful necklace," he commented as I fastened it. "It is. Isn't it family heirloom? Reminds me of something important." "What's that?" he asked. "That sometimes what looks like your worst moment can actually be the universe course-correcting your entire life." As we stepped into the elevator, I thought about Edward Bennett's words from all those years ago, calling me a gold digger, insinuating I was nothing but a beautiful face. How those cruel words had ultimately propelled me toward becoming more than I might have otherwise dared. Some people spend their lives digging for gold in all the wrong places, in other people's approval, in family names, in marriage alliances that promise security but deliver golden cages. The real gold, I'd discovered, was deeper and far more valuable, the unshakable self-worth that comes from walking away when you should, standing firm when it matters, and building a life that makes you proud, piece by precious piece. That's the revenge that keeps giving, becoming exactly who you were always meant to be, without needing anyone else's permission to shine.